Episode 1, Propaganda Pilot, Take 1. Mark.
Hi, my name is Bella Jamie, performer, writer, and producer here in Hollywood that you probably don't know. Propaganda is communication that is primarily used to influence or persuade an audience to further an agenda, which may not be objective and may be selectively presenting facts to encourage a particular perception to produce an emotional rather than a rational response to the information that is being presented. I'll admit it, I took that information from Wikipedia, but I felt that it was the best way of describing what propaganda is, as it comes in many forms. Understanding that propaganda can be found pretty much everywhere and that it can influence our behaviors, thoughts, perspectives, and reality without us even noticing is detrimental to living in a world so filled with media today. The average US citizen sees more commercials on a daily basis than many people around the world will ever witness. When advertisements surround us constantly and our forms of entertainment are to get lost in another person's stories, we may want to consider how it impacts us, not only as a society, but as individuals within the system. Whether it is subtle or on the nose, the symbols, themes, narratives, and people all have an integral part to play in the formation of media. To be responsible filmmakers, resistors, and audience members, we must understand what we are seeing, hearing, and feeling, and that it can very well all be engineered. Like when we go to a Disney theme park and have the immersive experience of being in a specific land, the smells that we smell and sounds that we hear while there all play a part in immersing us into the world that Disney's creating for us to experience. When there are entire industries dedicated to making you see what it wants you to see as a form of entertainment and experience, we must approach it within that context. We work hard to fool you every day. The glamour around Hollywood is as real as a hallucination, a mirage of what we wish reality was. To understand that our entertainment media is propaganda, we first have to look at the past. The history of film and the basis of storytelling throughout time can give us context on the media that we see today. I'm sure that you've been told a lot of things about the people of the past. Shadows on a cave wall or cave drawings. We have evidence of humans from thousands of years ago creating images on cave walls to tell their friends, families, and even foes of all the dangers that we faced back then. Whether it's an allegory for being conscious of the world outside of the cave, or to tell stories of the creatures you ran into while hunting and gathering, we've been telling stories since forever, around fires, on cave walls, and on papyrus. If they're going to believe what they see, hear, feel, read, then why not lie? The very basis of storytelling comes from attempts from humans to warn, inform, and educate others on the problems, fears, and regular necessary information. From cave drawings to verbal storytelling traditions found throughout the world and in every culture, each story serves a purpose and was created for a reason. Some were to set morality for the civilization at the time. We can see this through holy texts, scriptures, documents from law systems, and verbal traditions, as well as some of the belief systems we've long abandoned, while others were to warn of a potential problem. For example, Red Riding Hood. That one is about violation, rape, to teach kids to have a healthy fear of strangers and warn kids to not wander off by themselves. The Brothers Grimm fairy tales have tons of dark stories like this. However, it is still unknown exactly where some of these stories come from, as there are multiple stories all around the world that share similarities, so much so that historians still discuss who came up with the story first based on the first general appearance and, nixing all of the specific details, like whether it was a wolf or a tiger based off of the region. Many scholars argue that storytelling for children was to set morality. Storytelling has always been political and to educate the population, to give people morals. It was never just about entertainment. Art has always been somewhat political. Michelangelo painted himself and others in the famous Sistine Chapel's Last Judgment as an act of rebellion. Some sculptors even rebelled against those that commissioned them, often churches, hiding vulgarity for the keen eye to find and analyze for centuries to come. So, a lot of artists are actually just inherently political. Writers like George Orwell have discussed this, so have pretty much any of the ones who have done some prolific literature. A lot of them have argued politics and art are one and one. And that's where you can see that resistance has always been an art as well. From the very beginning of media in the United States, there is a connection of media being used for propagandic purposes. The film industry has always been racist. One of the most influential films in American film history is The Birth of a Nation, a film that influenced the reintroduction of the Ku Klux Klan into American society. Adapted from the book The Klansman, D.W. Griffith co-wrote the screenplay with Frank E. Woods and produced the film with Harry Aitken. This film is one of the most prolific in American film history, influenced reality enough to romanticize hatred, acting as propaganda enough to continue the persecution of Black communities in the United States of America. Griffith seems to have been one of the first to understand how certain film techniques could be used to create an expressive language. Quote taken directly from Wikipedia. Griffith is credited for film techniques like cross-cutting, parallel action, close-ups, and fade-outs. He also included a staged battle sequence with hundreds of extras made to look like thousands. Many Black characters in his hate-filled propaganda film were white actors in blackface. We will discuss a bit more about blackface and Jim Crow era performance in another video. But let's get back to D.W. Griffith's influence on our industry. And let's take a look at how it's influenced other filmmakers to put a bit of resistance in their work. Like the film BlacKkKlansman, a wonderful film directed by Spike Lee and co-produced by Jordan Peele and many others, mentions this history, even having dialogue within the cinematic language that plays directly off of D.W. Griffith's influence on film in the United States of America. Speaking of Jordan Peele, this same history is cinematically commented on in his movie Nope, too. But we'll talk about that in a bit. In terms of negative influences on cinema, I would like to mention that D.W. Griffith's influence spanned much further than just the United States. He even influenced European and Soviet filmmakers with his film entitled Intolerance, a film that he regarded as a clapback to the people who were rightfully offended by the negative stereotypes and portrayals of the Black community within The Birth of a Nation. Even at the time of that movie's release, it was considered controversial, and in spite of its divisiveness, The Birth of a Nation was a massive commercial success across the nation, grossing far more than any previous motion picture, and it profoundly influenced both the film industry and, unfortunately, American culture. Adjusted for inflation, the film remains one of the highest grossing films ever made. Grossest films, that was a Freudian slip. I'm willing to keep that. Proving how much racism sells to the hateful and the power of money. It really goes to show, if they wanted to fund tolerance, they would. The rebirth of the KKK took place only a few months after the release of The Birth of a Nation. And in 1992, the Library of Congress deemed the film culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, and selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. Meanwhile, Black and brown communities were having any of their artifacts that were deemed culturally significant burned down, stolen, even sometimes murdered. Friends and collaborators of D.W. Griffith include other prolific filmmakers, like Charlie Chaplin and others at United Artists, a group filmmakers created to have more freedom when producing their own work. But how did he even get his start in the film industry? Well, we can thank Thomas Edison for that. Griffith had worked in the industry as an actor at first, under Thomas Edison's production company, Edison Studios. When his writing couldn't cut it after submitting a script and trying to sell it and getting rejected, he got cast, started working as an extra, and then got into directing. A little bit more about Thomas Edison in the film industry. There's a famous blacksmith scene directed by William K.L. Dixon under the employment of Thomas Edison. It's the earliest known example of actors performing a role in a film. The men featured are not real blacksmiths, nor were they in a blacksmith shop working on metal. They were performers on a set, pretending to be blacksmiths. This is in the Library of Congress, the first film to ever be copyrighted, and the second oldest film in archive. Funny enough, Edison is another character that we can all judge. Propaganda about him being a famous inventor can be related to our modern day and how much innovation Elon Musk has brought to technology. Money, entitlement, and a lot of ego. Their greed goes to show that acquiring Tesla in this century was just a way of distancing themselves from their similarities with Tom Ed. There are even more stories throughout the history of film that showcase just how propagandic the medium itself is. The first moving image of the train in a theater freaked so many people out that the audience ran out, fainted, screamed, because they thought the train was actually coming towards them and out of the screen. Except all of that is actually just bullshit. It wasn't mirror neurons firing and getting the emotional responses from the audience, which we will talk about mirror neurons in a later video. It was all just made up. The audience's responses were all hearsay to get more people interested in going to the movies, striking up wonder in a wonderful way of getting more asses in seats, more tickets sold, so that they can, buy your 10th servant or yacht. Another great story is the teleplay War of the Worlds. I remember being taught that people actually thought a real alien invasion was occurring during the original broadcast, as the companies played it off as such. In reality, the mass hysteria we all learned about was just the newspapers not wanting to lose their audience. I guess that makes sense as to why we can give billions of dollars in free advertisements to farm clicks, anger, and anxiety. This tactic has been seen throughout time. I'm sure there have been people who've had crazy reactions to the newer technology and media that they've been shown. At the same time, being in this industry has shown me that a lot of that is exaggerated. Who knows how many people had heart attacks from watching a famous and then controversial movie? Who knows what type of events are faked just to get a certain message out there? How perfectly things align, huh? But back to the topic of film and propaganda. Even the invention of the camera is, at its core, marred with a discriminatory history. The camera itself was unable to accurately capture black and brown skin tones. Developing film between the 1940s to the 1990s meant that the accuracy of the colors were based off of a Shirley card. A card based off of the skin tone and color of white people, probably a white woman named Shirley. This stopped because in the 1970s, wood furniture and chocolate companies were complaining about how the camera couldn't capture the differences in tone of their products, because being able to sell is more important than people. In the 1990s, a different system was developed. TV had become more diverse and wanted to better capture their stars. More Shirley cards started developing. A black Shirley, a Latino Shirley, an Asian Shirley, and even a multiracial Shirley became more popular. Surely, you would think we'd have gotten rid of these biases when creating, but there are still issues that appear in technology even to this day. For example, in face tracking. And now, here is where I tell you how to resist as a filmmaker or as an audience member and consumer. One of my favorite ways to educate myself is through film. Personally, I believe that film and cinema are the new literature. That does not mean to stop reading. Please don't stop reading. Just to make sure that people know I advocate for reading. There are books I will be recommending in other videos after this one I mention often so that everybody can be informed and understand where we are at. But using cinema as a means of understanding different perspectives is one of the easiest and more fun ways to learn. To adequately resist, you do have to start somewhere. As well as boycotting evil, we first have to understand why, how, who, when, and where that evil is. Learning by watching and trying to understand film is one of my favorite ways to get tuned in to not only different perspectives, but what the artist themselves is trying to say within their work. Of course, you need a level of discernment when watching film. It's why I never really saw it as just entertainment, and why I'm here telling you that almost all of it is propaganda. To understand a different perspective around the film industry, there are plenty of movies and artists to have on your watch list. But if you want a fun and scary story, you can watch Nope by Jordan Peele. Make sure to pay attention to what he is trying to say through his work. He mentions film history that is real, and he cinematically converses with that subject matter, grappling with how differently people deal with the same medium of filmmaking. That context and history is already loaded into the plot, and I think it's a brilliant and more responsible way of filmmaking that shares and doesn't only preach about the significance of our medium. If you like, you can even learn more about why the artist decided to end the movie the way that they did. See what you think about it first, and then see what others have to say, to try and get an understanding of what you might be seeing. And of course, listening to what the directors and writers are talking about too. It's important to meet media with discernment. The first step in how to resist as a filmmaker, consumer, or audience member is to be aware of what you are watching, the messages that come across, what media may be trying to convince you of, what it is trying to make you feel, the context of what you are seeing, when it was made, who the artist is, and especially the subtext within the work itself. Understanding that what you are watching is sharing an ideology you may not be aware of, because that artist may be subconsciously or consciously leading you to their conclusion, is key. Because in our industry, not everything is as it seems. Next video, we'll be talking about the time that Hollywood was systematically censored, surveilled, and propagandized with the Hays Code, and how we may still be seeing the influence of a puritanical self-censorship guideline from back then, even today. I do want to say as a disclaimer that I did use a teleprompter today for this video. I wanted to get as much information to you guys as possible. Unfortunately, a lot of the resources that I learned this information with are not accessible for me anymore. So I don't have a lot of the stuff readily available. I am looking back in a lot of the readings and the stuff that I do have at my disposal. This is information that about $250,000 paid for. So please support me by following me, liking my stuff, commenting, giving me money. I don't know, but I do want to continue creating for you guys and showcasing a lot of the stuff that I have grown to be so passionate about, because this information is extremely important, especially considering what we're going to be facing as a country, as people, and as a planet. So please like, comment, subscribe, follow me on other social media. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a good day, night, whatever.